Thanks for coming to this very, very special moment for art and art education and all of education. Thank you for being here. It is my great honor to be on this platform with these two renowned educators and watchdogs for the world of education in general, helping us along the way, knowing what's right and good for kids. Dr. Laurel Chapman is known for her work as an advocate, educator, and researcher. She is the author of Approaches to Art in Education and Instant Art, Instant Culture, which I know many of us have that book, among many other writings. Selected publications have been in modern Greek, Dutch, Spanish, Japanese, Chinese, Malaysian, and Indonesian. Her recent research examines how think tanks, major foundations, and networks have influenced the federal and state policies of public education. Indeed, this is a policy conversation. Chapman's body of work provides a historical, instructional, and pedagogical resources for students, teachers, researchers, and us. Diane Ravitch is a historian of education, an educational policy analyst, and research professor. From 1991 till 93, she was the Assistant Secretary of Education and counselor to the Secretary of Education, Lamar Alexander, and in the administration for President George H.W. Bush. She was responsible for the Office of Educational Research and Improvement in the U.S. Department of Education. As the Assistant Secretary, she led the federal effort to promote the creation of voluntary state and national academic standards. She now hosts, and many of you know this, the very popular DianeRavitch.net blog, which we should all be a part of. Thank you.
Dennis, that's going to be 30 million so soon.
30 million soon, all right. Dr. Ravitch and Dr. Chapman are advocates for everything that is right and good for all students everywhere. Emphasize all. Dr. Chapman and Dr. Ravitch, you are among friends here, and we're looking forward to your advice, your insights, as we all strive to keep our chin up and serve our students. So let's get started. Last night, I had the opportunity to have dinner with a long-lost college friend and high school buddy. Haven't seen them in 40 years. And on the way back, we were reminiscing about our high school years, trying to think of our favorite teacher. And we came up with her, and we had the same teacher. Her name was Mrs. Rowling, and she was really short and a polio victim. And she could command so much from us country boys. It was simply amazing. And we both went on to very successful careers. And at that time, I'm sure we weren't thinking about anything, well, but the next lunch or something fun to do. But we both came up with that same teacher. It was very interesting. So, Dr. Ravitch, I've been reading your book, and I have a visual here. The American School System, How Testing and Choice Are Undermining Education. And I've been reading her book, and in that book,
you have to read The Death and Life.
The Death and Life, excuse me, of the great American school system. Anyway, I've been reading that book, and in that book she has a chapter that she says, what would Mrs. Ratliff do? And in my mind, what would my favorite teacher do in these times when it appears sometimes we have sort of a dark shadow over us and everything is a little tainted right now if you haven't noticed. So I'd like to start with that for both of our guests tonight. What would Mrs. Ratliff do nowadays? And Dr. Chapman, if you could think about that too, what would your favorite teachers do in these times?
Well, when I went to high school in Houston, Texas, I went to public schools from K through 12, and my favorite teacher, as you said, was Mrs. Ratliff, and she taught literature, and we never had any standardized tests. But she was a very tough marker, so we always had to meet her standards. And her standards were much more rigorous than any standards I've ever seen since then. So I think that she would be in rebellion against the imposition of standardized tests on everyone, everywhere, which now exists. She would find the use of test scores to grade her is deeply offensive. And I expect that she would have very low VAM scores and would be routed out of the profession. So I'm not sure that Mrs. Ratliff would survive, even though she inspired me and inspired so many other people. And I mentioned in that book that she gave all of us a graduation gift, and our graduation gift was a couple of lines of poetry. And one of them was, for me, was among them, but not of them, which was from Childe Harold, which we had not read, but which I subsequently had to read because that's where the line came from. And then the other was from Ulysses, to seek, to find, not to yield. And it was supposed to be about me, which is somebody in pursuit of knowledge and someone who would continue learning and fighting. And how is it, having graduated San Jacinto High School in 1956, that all these years later, what she did remains so vibrant in my mind? This is the imprint of a teacher.
Thank you. Dr. Chapman.
I received a handwritten note. It was actually very fine lettering from my 8th grade art teacher, junior high school, and it was personalized. I still have it. And it was, I hope you will always continue to make art. Now, if that teacher were alive in today's recent environment, she would be in great shape because she had a mastery-oriented curriculum. You had to make 100 on the color wheel. You had I won't go through the whole litany, but she had this kind of curriculum where if you couldn't make 100 on a written test of art terminology and art concepts, that you would have probably failed. So she would have probably fared pretty well during these last years. Now, there's another aspect of this. Later on, I met this teacher because I had a show of my painting, and I was invited to her home after that show as a kind of reunion, and she showed me her paintings. And it was only then that I realized how much better I was at art than she ever was. Now, that sounds arrogant. But I am eternally grateful to her for having imposed some requirements on me at that stage in my development. Not that they were great, but there were some amazing things that we did. We etched aluminum plates with asphaltum, muriatic acid outside. I've never done it since. We carved cypress, long, 2 inches thick, this long, into trays. So she was oriented in a way to making things and not just teaching fine art. So she's embedded in memory at many levels.
Very nice. And so I'm wondering where that would show up on our teacher evaluation systems of today. I'm not sure what rubric we would use for that one.
She would fail safety.
Yeah. So right upstairs, Dr. Chapman, I have my original Approaches to Art Education, your book. And it was $14.95 as a junior in the late 70s. But you said you have a few things in there that still ring very true for our audience here. And I'm wondering if we could move from that to some conversations about how we work and understand policy out there, the bigger world, so that when we're working in our classrooms, we can sort of do that inner circle of advocacy and moving outward, because we know that we have to help our members, we have to help each other with getting that picture of advocacy. But those three things you said, purposes of art, education, encourages the personal fulfillment through art experience, transmits an appreciation of the artistic heritage, and develops an awareness of the role of art in society. And they still ring true, Dr. Chapman, and I want you to know that. And we're still carrying that with us, and we're still trying to figure out how we can share that with our stakeholders without being at risk with our policymakers. So for both of you, thinking about that classroom teacher, that art teacher here today, and thousands of them out there, what can we do to start making a difference to keep the appreciation and the understanding of our culture in the classrooms?
Well, I would say that the first thing that teachers must do is to inspire their students and inspire a love of the arts, awaken the passion that is in every human being looking for support and encouragement. I think that what is so dreadful about the current era, and the current era lasting for, let's say, going back to the early 2000s and maybe even late 1990s, is that the focus on testing, on standardized testing in particular, has become so omnipresent that children's vision and their capacity for vision is being narrowed to think that every question has 4 possible answers and that there's a right answer to every question. And we know as adults that most questions don't have a right answer. They have different possibilities, and that what we want our young people to do is not to find the right answer, but to ask the right question. And even to question the question. Is this the right question? And very often when you have very wise children, they choose the wrong answer because their answer is better than the one that the test maker wanted. So we have this very deceptive and I think ultimately harmful regime that's been imposed over the past 20 years. As I said, when I went to school, we didn't take standardized tests, and our teachers knew what they taught, so they tested us on what we had been taught. Now, and it used to be that teaching to the test was considered unprofessional and unethical, and now people are given materials to teach to the test, which is still unprofessional and unethical. So I would say that what you must do as art teachers is to be true to your craft, be true to your own passion, and to have in your heart the ethic of what it means to teach, and to teach with love and with humanity, and then move beyond that to recognize that you are swimming in a very, very large pond, and to forgive the expression, the pond is being drained. And this pond of fresh water will soon be filled with coal waste, poisoning those of you who swim in the pond, poisoning your students. And we're living in an unprecedented time in our history. And I say this, we're both, older than everybody in the audience, so I can say this with some assurance. This is an unprecedented time where the federal government is actually opposed to education. Federal government is opposed to art. It will very likely, at the next 40 years, abolish the National Endowment for the Arts, abolish the National Endowment for the Humanities, possibly take away funding from research. The man who was just made the federal budget director said he didn't see why the federal government should support research at all. We're in a very dangerous era where ignorance is being elevated over knowledge, and so what you can't do is to just be depressed, although it's easy to be depressed. What you must do is to bring your passion to activism on behalf of your students. Become active I'm involved in an organization called the Network for Public Education. We went over the past 3 months from a membership of 22,000 to over 350,000. We have people in every state. We connect them with the organizations in their own state so that they can become active on behalf of education, on behalf of funding for education and respect for teachers. And there is also out there there's a website called The Indivisibles. And The Indivisibles is a website that has a guide about how to become active, how to make your voice heard, show up when you're congressman has a town hall. Speak out for your students, speak out for your school, speak out for art, speak out for music, speak out for all the things you care about. But you've got to be active. You can't just, there was always the saying in education that the teacher can close his or her classroom door and nobody knows what they're doing and they can just be left alone to teach. It's not like that anymore. They're draining the pond and you're not going to have any fresh water to swim in, and your students will not have the arts. The number of students in elementary school who currently have arts teachers is about 20%. That's horrible. It should be 100%. So you have to fight for your students, you have to fight for your profession, you have to fight for the arts, and that's my message.
Thank you.
We can all go home now. I think we're in a moment. This is my high tech. There's a book called The Black Swan, and it deals with the impact of the highly improbable. It's by an economist, but he has a background in the humanities. It's a very interesting book. So what is this moment? And we are in a very special moment. It's been called various things. A train wreck, a dumpster fire, a hot mess, and a death spiral. We have an inaugural address which says you are all flush with cash. Is that true? And that you don't do anything about transmitting knowledge to this generation. We have a theoretical structure for the moment that we're in, formulated not by the president, but by Steve Bannon. How many of you have ever heard the word deconstruction? Not in the context of dismantling almost every aspect of democratic governance that we have become used to. It's a matter of every 2 regulations that there are at the federal level, you have to get rid of 2 to save 1, which means that all sorts of guidance across all sorts of agencies, including, for example, an entire agencies like the EPA. What was one of the first moves? It's okay to dump
coal waste into fresh
coal
water.
Waste into streams. The FCC, the judicial system, almost every institution that is required to have a functioning government system is under attack. That's one aspect of what's happening. The second leg of this theoretical underpinning of what's going on is called economic nationalism, but there's also a cultural nationalism factor that's going into that. Now, basically, this is the America First and Made in America theme. Are you following what I'm saying? Okay. That means that you don't engage in trade agreements and you cut your relationships with almost every international organization you can. And that spills over into a cultural nationalism, so that all of these things are devalued and you run away from them. All of which are very prominent themes at this conference. If you look at your program, multiculturalism, globalism, pluralistic and elite knowledge, those are under attack. That includes the attack on science, the willingness to dismantle the national endowments and the public radio stations and so on. It explains the creation of alt facts, and fake news. Am I speaking to you? Okay. And it explains why the media is the enemy of the people, which is an extremely dangerous thing to have circulating. It's a real threat to freedom of the press, and in no small measure is a threat to you as art teachers. If you are, how many of you do check in with Diane's blog? I would encourage you to, because she often has posts from the field, all 50 states. She has international posts on the threats to freedom of expression, including some that deal with art classrooms. So be attuned. The bottom line is that there's a cultural war on. I hate to use that phrase, but this administration is for an American cultural identity which excludes African Americans, immigrants, women. How many of you marched? Have any of you? Why am I wearing pink for the first time in my life? And if you read the rhetoric from Trump and his surrogates, you will see that the heroes are white males, and they're called working stiffs, and they are Christian.
And straight.
Now, Diane can speak to this, because Diane is Jewish, and she is attuned beautifully to the explicit and the implicit messages that are being carried on. How many of you have encountered some threats in your own classrooms? Students feeling threatened under the current regime? Raise your hands high, super high. Get some pictures on that. That's important to see. Kids are being intimidated by this, and you are a barrier, and you are a cushion. You are, give me some words, wordsmith. You are the people who are most positioned to acknowledge their humanity wherever they are, whether they're gay, lesbian, transgender, queer, whether they are immigrants, whether the kids brought over here when they were infants, if they're Muslims. How many of you have students who are Muslim? They're particularly intimidated, I'm sure. So I need to get a little bit of water and get somebody else talking. Thank you very much. That's the context.
So we used to call this the inner circle of advocacy, when an art teacher with his or her students would first and foremost demonstrate the passion and the interest for learning in art and culture, and then to reach out for other stakeholders, their parents, administrators, fellow teachers, their community, and on and on. And we seem to sometimes have lost that connection. It's because we're so embroiled. It was interesting with social media. I saw more pictures of subplans of our teachers getting ready to come here than I've ever seen. Everybody was so excited. Subplans. And I remember those subplans, how many hours it took me to get ready to come here to be inspired. So now what? What do? I'm reading in some sources where our teacher preparation programs are down 34%, 35%. We're having challenges with keeping people in the field. And frankly, I fear for that. I worry that our best minds, our young people, early career educators, are simply looking at this not a place to go. How do we keep our chin up? How do we keep going?
Well, I have often been asked this question because when I go out and I talk about all of the threats and the attacks on education, and I think it isn't just an attack on public education, although it is that. I mean, the push for vouchers and the privately managed charter schools, the for-profit schools, the cyber charters, homeschooling, all of which somebody pointed out the other day that when I can't say the word. When Trump said in his speech the other night that there should be choice, and one of the choices was homeschooling, apparently Stephen Colbert took that to mean that you could choose your home. And he said he thought he might want to live in the Trump home. And I said that would be the one home I would not want to live in. It feels like a very cold, mean home. But public education is under attack. Funding for public schools are under attack. What they're talking about is taking the same pie and dividing it up into smaller pieces so that everybody gets a chunk, and every dollar that goes to a charter or voucher or cyber charter comes away from public schools. They're not saying we're going to double the pie so that everybody gets adequate funding. So there's an attack on public education, but also an attack on the teaching profession as such. And in almost every state, there has been legislation that has cut away the rights of teachers, the rights to collectively bargain, the rights to tenure, the working conditions, cutting back people's pensions, their health care. This unending attack coming in many cases from legislators who couldn't pass the 8th grade test they mandate.
A new criterion.
So, when very often people will say to me, so how do we keep going? How do we keep our heads up? And I say, well, first of all, you have to understand you're in the most important profession of all. Without the teaching profession, that we have no future as a society. And you have to understand that you're in the trenches, you're in the foxholes. There's all this fire coming your way, and you are being asked to do a job that is, at this moment, disrespected, underappreciated, but absolutely necessary. A lot of the reward you get will come from your students. And from them coming up to you in the street or in a store and saying, thank you for what you did for me. Without you, I wouldn't be here. Those are the psychic rewards that those idiot politicians will never get. But more than that, you have to understand that we're in a fight for our culture. We're in a fight for our future. And you're the front line. So are you willing to be brave? Are you willing to stand up and dodge the bullets? We have to have brave people, and you are the brave people. And I want to mention the other night, because this was one of the things I thought about as I was getting ready for today. I watched the Academy Awards presentation, and when the young man won the award for writing the lyrics for the Academy Award-winning song, he thanked his public school teachers. And I got so many emails from people saying, wasn't that incredible? I leapt out of my seat, and I thought, how little it takes to make teachers understand the impact they have. Just to have some guy at the Academy Awards saying, I thank my teachers. A few years ago when Viola Davis won the Academy Award, the first thing she said was, without my teachers at Central Falls High School in Providence, I wouldn't be here. Without my drama teacher. So, those are rewards you will have that those dumb legislators will never have. No one will ever come up to them and say, thank you for getting rid of my public school. No.
I'd like to pick up on that and ask how many big teachers here are new teachers? Student teachers. Okay, and how many of you are first-year teachers or second or third? Okay. What you need to do more than anything else is to network, and you have social media that enables you to do that. I hope that you're doing it in a way that is mutually supportive so that you honor and say thank you for that wonderful idea and give that mutual strength. Just use it. You have talents that I would have died for as a young teacher, and that's the ability to, what I don't do. I don't tweet, I don't Facebook, I don't do all of those other little symbols that show up on my computer screen. But I encourage you to do that, and I want you to try and keep that as positive as you can, and also to take advantage of the invisibles principle. That's a word to write down and to look up. It's a whole set of strategies.
Indivisibles.
Indivisibles, thank you, that have a little thing to do with the pink scarf I'm wearing, but it's an effective way of working within the system for change and showing up. I sent a copy of the Indivisibles agenda to a local person who's running for office, and she hadn't seen it, and she said, this is it. This is exactly how to make a difference. And this is why you were seeing town halls mobbed and representatives from Congress fleeing for their lives, not really, or conducting phone town meetings. But you need to get out and really do this, and you have two roles. One is your citizen, and the other is a young teacher trying to keep your job. And you know, as well as anyone, Dennis, having been a principal, the balancing act that's required there. But do be mutually supportive. For most of my professional life, I was in contact with the senior teachers that I had during my first year. They were mentors for me. I worked in a large school system, Dade County, Miami, Florida. At that time, it was the 5th largest in the nation. We had a supervisor of art, and we had an informal mentoring system. And I got adopted by people who became lifelong friends and mentors. So try and find somebody like that for you. And get other people to the national conferences and to the publications and to local versions of these, your state conferences, so that you have a sense of, I am not alone in this. That's very important.
I just want to add that last night, one of the readers on my blog, I think it was because I had posted a statement by the Lincoln Center organizations against any cuts to the arts. And so I got a lot of wonderful responses. And one of them was a YouTube clip, 40-minute clip, of Van Cliburn playing in 1958 at the competition in Moscow, where he was chosen at the age of 23 as the greatest interpreter of Rachmaninoff. And I decided, although I usually watch the news every night, I decided I'm going to listen to Van Cliburn and not watch the news. You know, I found out the news later. It was like being transported into another world. And here was this young man, 23 years old, and I started reading about him, and it said that he had grown up in Fort Worth, Texas. I grew up in Houston, but that for a time he lived in Kilgore, Texas. And I had an aunt and uncle who owned the pharmacy in Kilgore, and I visited them a few times. And I thought, gosh, I might have met Van Cliburn, 6 degrees of separation. And just to listen to him play, it transports you. Politics these days does not transport you. So I would say immerse yourself in what you love. And Dennis invited me earlier. He said, will you bring an example of something you love? So I'm going to give you something I love. And this is when I went to college. I had there were a number of poems that I had memorized because my English teacher in high school encouraged us to memorize poetry. So I want to share with you one that I loved. And I went to Wellesley College, and I came from public high school. It was a big deal for somebody from public high school in Houston to go to Wellesley. And I would walk around Lake Waban in Massachusetts, and I would recite this. And I used to know it by heart, but I don't want to miss a line, so I'm going to read it to you so I don't miss a line. Margaret, are you grieving over Golden Grove? I'm leaving. Leaves like the things of man, you with your fresh thoughts care for, can you? Ah, as the heart grows older, it will come to such sights colder by and by, nor spare a sigh, though worlds of wanwood leave me a lie, and yet you will weep and know why. Now no matter, child, the name, sorrow's springs are the same. Nor mouth had, no, nor mind expressed, what heart heard of, ghost guess. It is the blight man was born for, it is Margaret you mourn for. This is called Spring and Fall to a young child, Gerard Manley Hopkins. He was a early 19th century poet. I love that poem. I would recite it a couple of times a week, and I could probably recite it to you, but as I said, I didn't want to lose a line. But to me, that's what art is for, is to take you out of your time and place and allow your imagination to soar and to connect with humanity, not by color, not by all the other ways we divide ourselves, but just through spirit, through just by being a human being, and we can all connect on that level. And that's what we're fighting for in art, is to keep that spirit alive, in which we can be multilingual, multi-global, multicultural, multi-everything, and recognize person to person that we all share this common humanity.
Borderless, no borders, no walls.
So Laura and Diane are great friends, and they exchange a lot of information through Diane's blog. And I'd like to offer you both an additional opportunity to share anything with our audience, and maybe a little later, a few questions if we have time on the way out.
I did want to share that I had 7th grade art teacher and English teacher who collaborated, and the 7th grade teacher made us copy watercolor illustrations from books. I learned a lot about technique. The English teacher actually it was three-way, music teacher as well. We had to listen to recordings of music, and it would be called the privileged music of the era. And then we had to memorize and recite a poem. Mm-hmm. When the Earth's last picture is painted and the tubes are twisted and dry. That god-awful poem I knew by heart, and I devoted my life to delivering with such drama. But I do think there's some virtue in some of those routine things as anchors for other things, and you never know how it's going to play out over a lifetime. This whole notion of having outcomes at the end of the year that you can measure in specific terms is really pretty outrageous when you think about it. You're looking at a whole potential life. I mean, we are living examples of how important things are that you never recognize at the moment they're happening to you. So do the best you can with that. I would like to comment on, I think that you can't define art, but I owe a debt, and we all do, to Eldon Catter, who talked about craft. Whatever you're doing, craft means that you're doing it efficiently, carefully, skillfully, inventively, and beautifully. And all of us need to have that somewhere in our experience, and I hope that you have a way of getting that to your students as well, in addition to the, oh my God, look what happened on my paper today, I didn't expect that. The balance between the two, I think, is really a hallmark of excellent teaching.
Well, I want to make a pitch against using test scores to rank and rate children. I spent many years as a supporter of the idea of standards. I spent many years supporting testing. And then at some point, as I got a little bit older and a little bit wiser, I realized that the people who like testing best are the ones who always get high scores. because it validates them, and it says, I succeeded on merit, and if you didn't get high scores, you're not meritorious, so I deserve to be higher up in the status symbols than you are. But I think that I find myself now seeing all kinds of different talents and you know, Howard Gardner's frames of minds and different, I don't think of them as different intelligences, different strengths, different skills, different abilities. And so I'll look, for example, at the Olympics and see this little girl turning multiple flips in the air and thinking, oh my God, that's incredible. What were her test scores? And then you see somebody making magic with a musical instrument. And I have, again, that thought, but what are his test scores? And, you know, you realize it doesn't matter. What matters is that you find the things you love to do and get the encouragement to do them well. And also to recognize that each of us is the only one there is on Earth. There are no, unless you're a twin, an identical twin or identical triplet, there are no others like you. You're the only one like you. And a standardized test cannot reduce you to a number. They try to, and in the eyes of our policymakers, they're doing it, but it's wrong, and you have to know in your heart, this is wrong. It's wrong. You are not a number. You are not a test score. You are a person with many different possibilities, and no matter what your abilities or your disabilities, you deserve the right to develop and grow as a human being in the best way that you can, and no test score should limit or rank you. You should not be number 1, you should not be number 120, or your school should not be graded A through F, for heaven's sakes. This to me is one of the worst ideas that's now current in education. This notion that you can take a complex institution where there are many people, some of them doing a terrific job, some of them not doing such a good job, and then call the whole thing based on test scores A, B, C, D, F, and then say the F score is going to be closed. If a child came home with a single letter grade, the parent would be outraged. They would say, how can you call my child a C? My child is not a C. She's good in this, she's not so good in that, but 1 letter grade? And then you're going to multiply that for, let's say, 1,000 kids or 500 kids and say the whole institution gets a letter grade. Only crazy people would do something like this. And that's, in fact, what we're doing. So, something about the arts that I think needs to be emphasized, and I think it's something you should all bear in mind, which makes it very different from test taking. One is that to be good in any art, you must be disciplined. It's not a matter of just taking paint and throwing it on the paper. You must be disciplined. You must practice, as Laura said, your craft. It requires tremendous skill and self-discipline to be good and to get better. And always there is this idea of improvement. So discipline, self-discipline is something that you learn through the practice of the arts. The other thing about the arts is you can't copy it off the internet. You can't plagiarize it. You can't cheat. It's your work. If you're playing in an orchestra, no one else can do it for you.
Yet.
You've got your instrument and you've got to do your part. If you're playing a solo, you're up there all by yourself. You can't fake it. So this is far more demanding than taking a standardized test because it's you, it's your work, it's your passion. And if you're good enough to do it in a group, you can't let the group down by flubbing your work. So this is the most highly disciplined of the school studies. Any form of art that requires collaboration or that requires an individual performance, whether it's a play or music or any other art form. So you must go out with your heads held high and say, what I do is far more meaningful, far more significant, and far more revealing than the ability of a student to pick the right answer on a standardized test, the question of which might be wrong and the answer might be wrong.
We began our conversation with reflecting on those teachers that made a difference in our lives. And as I look at all of you today, I know that you are that teacher. You are that person who out there, somebody is thinking about you and how you have helped them in their lives or careers or whatever. I think of the gymnast that's not allowed to practice because his or her scores aren't high enough. That happens nowadays. But now more than ever, we as an association and you have to lead that conversation. I'm not fully convinced that our communities know what we know, and we have to get really good at this conversation, just like our guests today have shared. It goes beyond just art. It goes beyond to that whole child, that well-rounded kid that grows up, that helps us in our communities. So with that, we're going to finish up. Any last words?
I would like to urge you to visit Diane's blog. It's an extraordinary site where teachers tell their stories, and she curates news about education, including education policy. And 30 million by the end of April? Mm-hmm. People are there, and you will. How many of you have visited? Quite a few of you. Mm-hmm. It's not the only one, but it's another excellent one is Mercedes Schneider, who is a full-time teacher and has just written a book on choice and vouchers, and it's well worth stop. Now, there's another reason why I wanted to end. Dr. Ravitch is part of a newly formed shadow cabinet where she will be playing the role of Secretary of Education. And with other enlightened people, we'll be doing fact-checking. I think one of the most recent outrages was the description of historically black colleges as examples of choice. So I'm looking forward to that. That was announced on our blog only two days ago. And just as a personal token, I have had engraved on this whistle your name, and it says Extraordinary Whistleblower.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you. That's great. Thank you so much.
Stand up for the camera.